It was precisely the sort of May afternoon designed to reassure foreigners that England is worth the drizzle. The hedgerows of Hampshire fluttered faintly in a breeze no less demure than a lady's sigh. Somewhere, a blackbird rehearsed a variation of Handel with amateurish vigour, and above the groomed lawns of Lavender House, not a single cloud dared mar the civility of the sky. It was a Thursday, which meant the tea at Lavender House was likely to include something abominably indelicate, like gooseberry scones or war stories. Lord Peter Wimsey, travelling in his distinctive and slightly disgraceful Daimler, drew up before the house at precisely 3 o'clock. The car gave a protesting wheeze. He claimed it did so only out of loyalty to its long-dead designer, and was handed off to a rather startled gardener, whom Lord Peter addressed with his customary cheerfulness. Careful of the left headlamp, old fruit it's held on by divine providence and sealing wax. The latter is from a cathedral in Rouen, so treat it with due reverence. The gardener nodded, clearly uncertain whether reverence was a prerequisite for operating motor vehicles. Lavender House was not, strictly speaking, a house. It was a minor Jacobean manor that had flirted with Gothic during a misguided 1870s restoration, and now bore the architectural equivalent of a nervous breakdown. Gables drooped at odd angles, stone grotesques leered faintly under ivy, and the upper windows had an alarming tendency to appear and disappear depending on where one stood. A house, Wimsey thought, which had perhaps seen too many secrets, and far too many attempts at romantic poetry. He was met at the door not by a butler, who, one imagined, had expired years ago of rigid propriety, but by a young woman of roughly 25, dressed in that peculiar blend of floral rayon and defiance only English middle daughters can achieve. "You must be Lord Peter," she said, unsmiling. "I expect you've come for the tea." "My dear young lady," said Wimsey, peering past her into the vestibule, "I never come for the tea. I come for the scones, endure the tea, and stay for the gossip." Though I confess I hadn't expected to be received by the Greek chorus, her brow did not lift. "Mother's upstairs. She's not quite herself." "How very tragic," Wimsey said brightly. "Has she taken to wearing other people's selves instead?" Always a dangerous pastime. I tried that once at Oxford, resulted in a theological scandal and a misunderstanding, involving a bishop's niece. The girl gave a sigh that implied she had long since abandoned hope of understanding adult eccentricities. "You'd better come in." Inside, Lavender House smelt of dried rose petals, decaying upholstery, and the vague reek of ancestral disappointment. Wimsey was halfway through inspecting a rather vulgar Victorian escritoire, whose claw feet appeared to be attempting escape, when he realized something peculiar. There was no sound, no ticking clock, no kettle boiling, no footfall upon the landing. The house was silent in the manner of a sarcophagus. "Miss Clara," she said, already halfway up the stairs. "Clara," Wimsey said thoughtfully, "has it occurred to anyone that Lavender House is being uncommonly reticent?" She paused. "If you mean quiet, yes. We've all noticed it." Wimsey tilted his head, listening. "I don't mean quiet, Miss Clara. I mean expectant. It's the kind of silence one finds before a jury returns." Clara frowned. "Mother's in her room. She says she won't come out until Aunt Marjery comes back." Only Aunt Marjery has not come back," Wimsey supplied gently. "She went out Tuesday morning," said Clara slowly, "for her usual walk, and she hasn't come back." "At all?" There was a pause. "Aha," said Wimsey. "Well, that puts the gooseberry scones into an entirely new perspective." Lord Peter Wimsey did not immediately react to Clara's statement, but instead removed a slim silver case from his pocket, selected a Turkish cigarette with a surgeon's precision, and tapped it lightly against the lid before placing it between his lips. He did not light it. Instead, he turned his pale eyes back to Clara with an expression that hovered somewhere between mild curiosity and amused inquiry. And what, pray, does your estimable mother believe has become of Aunt Marjery? Clara looked down the stairs, as if reluctant to give the question the dignity of an answer. She insists she's simply gone to London, that she forgot to leave a note. I see, Whimsy said, still not lighting the cigarette. And has she done so before? This tendency to disappear without documentation? No, Clara said bluntly. Aunt Marjery may have had odd tastes, but she never skipped tea and she never missed church. Certainly not on a Thursday. Religious. Devotion. Devotion to seating arrangements. She liked to know who'd worn what and why. It's not much of a village, Lord Peter. One takes what theatre one can. Whimsy nodded solemnly. Quite. Did anyone accompany her on this stroll? Of hers, no, it's her habit to go alone. She has a path she takes, through the orchard, up along the boundary wall, past the ruined chapel. She says it clears her head. Murmured Whimsy. I suppose it might, provided one doesn't get it knocked in on the way. That earned him a glance of uncertain appraisal. Clara was not, he noted, quite the milksop ingénue one expected in such cases. There was grit under the clipped vowels. Well, he said briskly, perhaps your good housekeeper will enlighten me further. I always find domestic staff more illuminating than police statements. There's a native honesty in silver polish. Henshaw, summoned from the depths of the house like a reluctant spectre, was precisely what one might expect from someone who had served in a half-titled household since the Great War. Rigid posture, severely tied-back hair, and an air of controlled "Morning." She did not bow to Whimsy, perhaps correctly guessing he would consider it vulgar, but she did offer a stiff nod. I suppose you'll be wanting to know when she went out, she said without preamble. Tuesday morning, 11:15. Wore the green wool coat, the brooch with the amethyst, and those dreadful rubber-soled shoes. Indeed, said Whimsy, affecting interest. And how do you know it was 11:15? Mrs. Henshaw sniffed. Because I heard the hall clock strike. I was in the pantry at the time, and I heard the latch go as I was putting away the silver. I remember thinking she hadn't taken her walking stick. She's usually particular about it, ever since she twisted her ankle in 42. She left the stick? It was still by the door that evening, said Mrs. Henshaw grimly, as if the stick's loyalty had been betrayed. She never goes up the chapel path without it. A curious omission. And the brooch, amethyst, you say? Her favourite, set in a silver filigree, very old, belonged to her mother. She'd not part with it short of the grave. Whimsy raised one fine brow. We shall hope that is not a prophetic turn of phrase. Mrs. Henshaw sniffed again and folded her hands. You may take it how you like, my lord, but something's wrong. The house knows it. The house knows it? Whimsy repeated with interest. An oddly poetic statement for someone who inventories starch. The housekeeper straightened. This place listens. You don't live here long without feeling it. The walls breathe. The floors creak when no one's there. And the dog won't go near the east wing, hasn't for days. And has this ghostly aversion been corroborated by anyone else? Ask Clara, said Mrs. Henshaw flatly, or cook, or the vicar, if you're feeling brave. But don't mock it, my lord. There's things in this house that prefer to be left alone. Whimsy smiled thinly. I do assure you, Mrs. Henshaw, I make it a rule never to interfere with a ghost unless properly introduced. He turned back to Clara, who had been standing arms folded at the base of the stairs. Would you mind showing me Aunt Marjery's room? Clara hesitated a moment, then gave a small nod. It's up the north corridor. They ascended the stairs, which creaked dutifully beneath Whimsy's polished brogues. The corridor smelled faintly of lavender water and mothballs. Marjory's room, when they reached it, was fastidiously tidy. Too tidy. There was no sense of recent use, no dropped hairpins, no slippers left askew, not even the scent of perfume one might expect in a lady's sanctuary. A thin layer of dust had begun to settle on the dressing table. "She hasn't slept here since Monday night," Clara said, her voice lower. "The bed hasn't been touched." Whimsy nodded, eyes flicking from the unused blotter to the drawn curtains, and then to a curious discoloration on the carpet near the hearth. He bent down and brushed it with one gloved finger. "Hot water mark," he murmured. "But no fire has been lit for days." "Curious." "She hated drafts," said Clara. "She wouldn't have left a kettle sitting out." "And yet," murmured Whimsy, "someone did." He crossed to the writing desk, lifted the lid. Inside was a single folded piece of paper. Not a note, an old bill, garden supplies, nothing of interest, but behind it, tucked into the recess beneath the inkwell, was something more intriguing, a handkerchief monogrammed with an ornate FF, said Whimsy aloud. "Now who here starts with F?" Clara stepped forward. "Frederica, Aunt Marjorie's cousin, but she died last year." "Ah." He turned the kerchief over. A faint smear of what looked like grease or ointment marred one corner. Clara leaned closer. "She used to use wintergreen salve for her arthritis. It smells like boiled mince." Whimsy sniffed. "Indeed. But this isn't wintergreen. It's linseed and camphor. Something rather stronger. Possibly veterinary." Clara looked puzzled. "What would Aunt Marjery be doing with that?" "Quite," Whimsy said, pocketing the handkerchief delicately. "Tell me, who else was in the house on Tuesday?" "My mother, of course. Mrs. Henshaw, cook, the gardener, Thomas, and the vicar stopped by in the afternoon." "Ah, vicars," said Whimsy lightly. "God's representatives and occasional inveterate snoops. What time did he arrive?" Clara frowned. "Around 4, I think. I remember because the clock in the hall had just struck." 4 o'clock, Whimsy repeated. "And the hall?" "Clock struck 11:15 that morning too, you said." She nodded. Whimsy tapped his lip. "Might I inspect that clock?" It was a large, old-fashioned affair with brass fittings and a face like a disapproving magistrate. Whimsy examined it carefully, then leaned back. "Miss Clara," he said gently, "this clock is precisely 7 minutes slow." Clara blinked. "What?" 7 minutes. Which means that when Mrs. Henshaw heard it strike 11:15, it was in fact closer to 11:22. She stared at him. "But what difference does that make?" "Only that someone might have been relying on it," said Whimsy, "and if so, they might have expected a very different alibi." He stood, brushing a speck of dust from his sleeve. "You know, Miss Clara, I begin to suspect Aunt Marjery may not have walked out of this house at all. Or if she did, he—" paused, looking out the drawing-room window toward the orchard, where the trees trembled faintly in the breeze. "She may have walked straight into a trap." Whimsy's gaze remained fixed on the orchard, as if it might offer up its secrets to his quiet contemplation. The afternoon sun, dipping low behind the distant hills, cast long, sinister shadows across the tangled branches, and a faint chill crept along the spine of the house. Clara shifted uneasily by the window, her arms still folded, as if bracing herself against an invisible threat. "Walked into a trap," she echoed softly, as if afraid to give the notion voice. "Precisely," Whimsy said, turning with a faint smile. "It's a phrase one must employ with some caution. There's an overuse of traps in popular detective fiction, often to mask the absence of logic. But here, I think it applies quite neatly." Clara looked at him with growing perplexity. "But who would want to trap Aunt Marjery?" The question was answered before Whimsy could reply by a soft footfall in the hallway. Mrs. Henshaw appeared again, her face ashen but resolute. "Begging your pardon, Lord Peter," she said, "but the gardener, Thomas, says he found something strange in the orchard early this morning." Whimsy's interest was piqued immediately. "Something strange. Pray, do go on." "He was walking the dog near the ruined chapel," Mrs. Henshaw explained. And he says there were footprints in the soft earth near the old well. Footprints, Whimsy murmured. And what sort of footprints might those be? Mrs. Henshaw hesitated. Boots, apparently, not the gardener's own, and too large for most of the men in the village. A larger shoe, Whimsy mused. Well. And you say the dog avoided the east wing, which is where exactly? The east wing runs along the orchard and the ruined chapel, Clara said, as if confirming the geography. It's been locked off for weeks now. No one goes near it. Whimsy rubbed his chin thoughtfully. A locked-off wing, a ruined chapel, footprints by the well, and a lady vanishing into thin air. It seems Lavender House is keen to preserve its mysteries. Mrs. Henshaw shifted uneasily. The police came this morning to ask questions, but they didn't seem inclined to look beyond the obvious. Ah, the police, Whimsy said with a faint arch to his voice. One must always be grateful for their zeal, even if it is occasionally misdirected, Clara sighed. They think Aunt Marjery simply left of her own accord, that she's run away, but no one believes that. Run away, Whimsy repeated, waving an elegant hand. The phrase sounds a little theatrical in such a setting, don't you agree? Clara nodded. Exactly, she was hardly the sort to run away. Then it is fortunate you summoned me, Miss Clara. He allowed himself a modest bow. Now, to begin with, I should like to hear more about the day Aunt Marjery disappeared. You mentioned she left without her walking stick, which in itself is a curious detail. Mother found it by the door, Clara said, but none of us saw Aunt Marjery leave. No one heard the front gate. Whimsy's eyes twinkled. No one heard the gate, you say, even with the wind as it was? Not a sound, Clara confirmed. We thought it odd. The gate has a squeaky hinge. A squeaky hinge, Whimsy repeated, rising and moving toward the front door. He knelt beside it, inspecting the brass handle and the well-worn threshold. Indeed, I can confirm this gate does not suffer silence lightly. Clara watched him with growing interest. So you think she didn't leave by the front? Possibly, Whimsy said. Or if she did, it was by some means so discreet as to fool the most diligent ear. Now, is there a back door? The kitchen door, yes, Clara replied. But it's bolted from the inside every evening. And that would have been Tuesday? Yes. Then the question arises. How did Aunt Marjery exit the grounds at all? Let us not forget the garden walls are rather formidable. They stepped outside into the fading light. Whimsy paced toward the orchard, his gaze flicking to the old well and the crumbling chapel beyond. Tell me about this well, he said, pausing at the gate. It's old, Clara explained. Disused. For years. The cover is rotten. Whimsy crouched to examine the ground. And these footprints? Mrs. Henshaw approached with Thomas, the gardener, a burly man with dirt-streaked hands and a weather-beaten face. Here, sir, Thomas said, gesturing to a patch of disturbed earth. I found them this morning, just by the well. Looked like someone had been standing there for a while. Whimsy leaned closer. The footprints were large indeed, perhaps a size 12, and bore the imprint of well-worn leather boots. But it was their pattern that caught Whimsy's sharp eye. The prints moved toward the well, stopped abruptly, and then there was a faint scuff mark, as if the wearer had shifted weight, then turned back. Interesting, Whimsy murmured. Who in this house wears boots like these? Not many, Clara said quickly. The gardener, perhaps, and my uncle. He visits sometimes. Frederick, but he's been in London for weeks. Aha, Whimsy said. Frederick, any particular reason he might want to be here now? Clara shrugged. No one knows. He's a reclusive sort. Whimsy's eyes narrowed. A reclusive sort who wears boots large enough to tread over suspicion. I shall add him to my list of persons of interest. Mrs. Henshaw cleared her throat. I might add, sir, the vicar wears boots like that too, but he was here later in the day after the disappearance. Timing is everything, Whimsy said. Tell me, Thomas, you were with the dog when you found these prints? Yes, my lord. And the dog avoided this place? Thomas nodded. Wouldn't come near, barked a bit, then backed off. Canine intuition, Wimsey said. Not always reliable, but worth noting. He stood and turned toward the chapel ruins, where shadows lengthened ominously. Miss Clara, he said, is it true the east wing is locked because of recent repairs? Yes. The roof has been leaking, and the plaster is crumbling. Has anyone been inside recently? No one but Mr. Green, the carpenter. Mr. Green? Wimsey raised an eyebrow. And what of him? Quiet man. Keeps to himself. Ah, the quiet ones, Wimsey murmured. Often the most intriguing. Clara glanced at him with a sudden spark of hope. Do you think Aunt Marjery might have gone inside? Wimsey considered. Possible, but unlikely if she feared draughts and required a walking stick, unless something or someone drew her there. Someone. Clara's voice was barely a whisper. Precisely. Wimsey took a few steps forward, scanning the rubble-strewn floor of the chapel. Tell me, has anything else gone missing from the house? A trinket, a letter, a key? Clara hesitated. Now you mention it. Aunt Marjery's small silver salver disappeared from the drawing room last night. No one can say when. A salver, Wimsey said thoughtfully. An object at once ornamental and functional. Its disappearance might be symbolic or practical. Mrs. Henshaw's expression hardened. I'll see if I can find it, my lord. Wimsey nodded. Thank you, Mrs. Henshaw. You might also inquire discreetly if anyone noticed anything unusual on Tuesday, no matter how trivial it seems. As dusk gave way to a gathering gloom, Wimsey paused at the garden gate, peering once more. At the darkening orchard, Aunt Marjery is not simply lost, he said quietly. She has been deliberately taken or frightened away under false pretenses. The question is by whom and to what end? Clara swallowed hard. And where do we start? Wimsey smiled, though the faintest shadow lingered beneath his eyes. With the smallest details, Miss Clara, with a misplaced handkerchief, a clock running slow, and footprints that tell a story if one knows how to read them. Lavender House may be old, but its secrets are not beyond my reach. He looked up at the windows, those eyes of stone and glass, and gave a final nod. Let us proceed with care. For every house hides a multitude of truths, and some are darker than others. The house, now draped in the slow encroachment of twilight, took on an almost sentient quality, its long windows reflecting the darkening sky like watchful eyes. Wimsey's footsteps echoed softly on the flagstones as he followed Clara and Mrs. Henshaw back into the dimly lit hall. The fading light cast long shadows down the corridor, and for a moment the grand old building seemed less a domicile than a cathedral of secrets. Mrs. Henshaw, Wimsey began, you mentioned earlier that the vicar paid a visit the very afternoon Aunt Marjery disappeared. I should very much like to speak with him. Is he still in the village? Indeed, my lord. Reverend Spindle never misses an opportunity for a parish call, and he's currently lodging at the vicarage. Splendid. A man of the cloth often reveals the moral undercurrents of a community, though not always in the way one might expect. Clara guided Wimsey to a small sitting room where he settled into a high-backed chair, the faint scent of pipe tobacco curling about him. The room's heavy curtains were drawn, and a low fire flickered in the hearth, lending a reluctant warmth to the gathering gloom. Clara, meanwhile, disappeared upstairs to inform her mother and to gather the household staff for their impending interviews. Mrs. Henshaw remained at Wimsey's side, a living reminder of Lavender House's stern discipline. It is rather peculiar, Wimsey mused aloud, that a lady as fastidious as Aunt Marjery should leave without her stick. Not only that, but the clock's discrepancy and those footprints near the well suggest an element of deliberate deception. Mrs. Henshaw nodded solemnly. There's been talk in the village, my lord. Whispers about old grievances. Some say the ruined chapel is cursed. Others think the family's fortunes are crumbling. Ah, the inevitable descent into melodrama, Wimsey said dryly, though melodrama does have its uses, particularly when one must sift the wheat from the chaff. At that moment, the door opened gently, and Clara returned, accompanied by her mother, Mrs. Marsh, a woman of severe bearing, whose eyes bore the fatigue of a restless night. "Lord Peter," she said briskly, "I am grateful you have come. We are all quite beside ourselves." "Mrs. Marsh," Wimsey replied, "I assure you no one is better suited to restoring order to such domestic upheaval. Might I begin by inquiring about the household routine on Tuesday, specifically who came and went, and at what times?" Mrs. Marsh glanced at Clara before replying. "My daughter has been most helpful, but I shall provide what I can. Aside from Aunt Marjery, of course, there was myself, Mrs. Henshaw, cook, the gardener Thomas, and, as you know, the vicar." "And any visitors?" "No one else, except Frederick Marsh, my late husband's nephew, but he has been in London for some time." Wimsey nodded. "Do you happen to know if Frederick had any particular reason to return, or any quarrel with Aunt Marjery?" Mrs. Marsh's lips pressed into a thin line. "No quarrel, but Frederick has always been something of a thorn. He was fond of Aunt Marjery's fortune, I dare say." "Aha." Wimsey steepled his fingers. "A motive to be kept in mind, certainly. Now, Mrs. Marsh, what about that silver salver?" "Gone," she said simply. "Vanished sometime during Tuesday evening. We only noticed it missing when preparing for dinner." "And no one saw anything unusual?" "We are but a small household," Mrs. Marsh said with a trace of indignation, "and none of us heard or saw anything out of the ordinary." Wimsey's eyes twinkled faintly. "Ah, but there are degrees of ordinary. In a house like this, even the smallest deviation can be a loud alarm." There was a brief knock at the door. Clara opened it to admit a tall, lean man in a threadbare coat, Reverend Spindle, whose pallid complexion and nervous twitch bespoke an existence more academic than pastoral. "Lord Peter Wimsey," the vicar said, offering a tentative hand. "I trust I am not intruding." "On the contrary, Reverend. Your timely arrival is most welcome." After brief introductions, Wimsey invited Spindle to sit by the fire. The vicar seemed ill at ease, folding and unfolding his hands with a habitual nervousness. "I understand you visited Lavender House the afternoon of Aunt Marjery's disappearance," Wimsey began. "Yes," Spindle replied, "around 4 o'clock. Mrs. Marsh summoned me for a brief consultation on parish matters." "And did you notice anything unusual during your visit?" The vicar hesitated. "Unusual? Well, there was an air of tension. Aunt Marjery seemed distracted, even agitated." "Agitated? About what?" "That I could not say. She was vague and declined to speak freely." "Did she mention anyone in particular? Any visitor or letter?" Spindle shook his head. "Only that she was troubled by an old family matter. Something about her late cousin, Frederica." Wimsey leaned forward. "Frederica Marsh, the one who died last year?" "Yes," the vicar said, lowering his voice. "A rather scandalous figure, from what I gathered. Rumours of debts, ill health, and perhaps a secret or two." "Secrets, Reverend, are the currency of families," Wimsey observed, "and they tend to have a habit of resurfacing when least expected." Spindle nodded. "Indeed. I fear Aunt Marjery may have been haunted by more than just memories." "Haunted, but not by ghosts," Wimsey added with a faint smile. "Rather by the living." The vicar shivered slightly and rose. "Forgive me, Lord Peter, but I must return to my duties. The congregation waits." "Of course, Reverend. Your candour is appreciated." After Spindle's departure, Wimsey sat back, hands folded, eyes narrowed in thought. The evening deepened, the firelight flickering against the heavy curtains, and the house seemed to settle into a brooding silence. Clara returned carrying a tray with tea and biscuits. She placed it on the small table beside Wimsey and sat quietly. "Do you think Aunt Marjery was lured to the orchard?" she asked softly. "Lured or compelled," Whimsy said. "The footprints by the well, the missing salver, and the discrepancy in the clock's timing all suggest a carefully orchestrated plan. And Frederick," Whimsy sighed, "the elusive Frederick Marsh, a man who may yet hold answers. If he has returned, it would explain the timing. But until we see him, it remains speculation." Clara looked down at her hands. "Mother is worried. She fears the worst." Whimsy's eyes softened slightly. "Fear is a potent motivator. But it can also cloud judgment. We must tread carefully." He rose and walked to the window, gazing out at the moonlit orchard, the chapel ruins cast in silver shadow. "Miss Clara, Mrs. Marsh, Mrs. Henshaw," he said, turning back. "I intend to spend the night here. It may be that Aunt Marjery's disappearance is linked to the secrets this house guards. And you believe the answers lie within its walls, or just beyond them?" Whimsy replied cryptically. "Tomorrow I shall speak with the gardener and the other staff. There are threads here, some frayed, others taut. We shall follow them and see where they lead." Clara nodded, a flicker of hope mingling with uncertainty in her eyes. "Thank you, Lord Peter," she said. "For everything." Whimsy inclined his head. "It is my pleasure. After all, mysteries are best tackled, not with brute force but with patience and precision." As night deepened and Lavender House settled into uneasy slumber, Whimsy allowed himself a small, knowing smile. The game, he thought, was very much afoot. The first tendrils of dawn were barely brushing the horizon when Whimsy was roused by a faint, irregular tapping at his door. He opened it to find Clara, pale but determined, her eyes carrying the restless weight of the night. "Lord Peter," she whispered, "there's been a development. Thomas, the gardener, wishes to speak with you. He's waiting in the morning room." "Excellent timing," Whimsy said, smoothing his dressing gown with a theatrical flourish. "I shall see what the man has to say. Thank you for waking me, Miss Marsh." The morning room, with its array of potted plants and windows framing the awakening orchard, smelled faintly of earth and dew. Thomas, a wiry man with a weathered face and eyes sharp despite their years, stood by the window, clutching a worn cap. "Good morning, Mr. Thomas," Whimsy began, settling into a chair opposite him. "I understand you have some observations to share." Thomas cleared his throat. "Aye, sir. It's about the night Miss Marjery went missing. I was out by the stables late, tending to the horses. About 10:30 I heard voices near the orchard, low, urgent-like." "Voices? Did you recognize them?" "Nay, sir. Too dark to see faces. But I caught a few words, mention of debts, and something about a silver for the silence." Whimsy raised an eyebrow. "An intriguing phrase. And the time, 10:30. That conflicts with the household's last sighting of Miss Marsh, doesn't it?" Thomas nodded gravely. "It does, sir. The kitchen staff say she was in the drawing room until near 9, but no one saw her after that. So there is a window during which she vanished, between 9 and 10:30 approximately." "Precisely." Whimsy's mind began to knit the facts together, the missing silver salver, the mysterious voices, and the discrepancies in the timeline. "Mr. Thomas, did you notice anything else unusual that night? Footsteps, doors opening?" The gardener rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Now you mention it, I did hear the back door creak open, followed by hurried footsteps heading toward the orchard. But by the time I got outside, there was only silence and the chill of night." "Thank you, Thomas. Your testimony is invaluable." After Thomas left, Whimsy paced the room, considering the significance of a nocturnal meeting in the orchard. The phrase, "silver for the silence," implied a bribe or blackmail, something decidedly less genteel than the Lavender House facade suggested. Later that morning, Whimsy arranged interviews with the remaining household staff, starting with the cook, Mrs. Bailey. The stout woman was a fortress of propriety, her cap starched to perfection. "Mrs. Bailey," Whimsy began, "might you tell me about the household routine on Tuesday evening? Specifically, the movements of Miss Marjery." Mrs. Bailey sniffed. "Miss Marjery retired to her room shortly after dinner, sir. She was a stickler for routine, never late to bed. I prepared her supper as usual, but she left it untouched." "Untouched? That seems peculiar." "Indeed, sir. She appeared distraught, and I overheard her speaking softly on the telephone earlier that day, something about unsettled affairs and debts." "A telephone call," Whimsy murmured. "Did you catch the number or recipient?" Mrs. Bailey shook her head. "No, sir, but Miss Marjery was quite agitated afterwards." "Very well, thank you, Mrs. Bailey." Next came the maid, Elsie, a nervous young woman whose hands trembled slightly as she recounted her evening. "Miss Marsh asked me to fetch a book from the library around 9, sir," Elsie said. "I found the room empty and the window was ajar. I closed it and locked the door behind me." "A window left open," Whimsy noted, "but no sign of Miss Marsh. That is an anomaly worth noting." Elsie nodded vigorously. "Yes, sir, and I heard a faint humming sound, like a tune from the chapel bell, but it seemed too late for any service." Whimsy's thoughts turned to the ruined chapel. The bell was long silent, or so everyone believed. Could someone have rung it to send a clandestine signal? The day grew heavier with suspicion, and as the last interview concluded, Whimsy found himself drawn once more to the orchard's edge. The well, its stone rim worn and slick with moss, beckoned like a dark promise. He knelt, inspecting the ground closely. The soil near the well was disturbed, but the footprints here were fewer, as though someone had taken great care to avoid leaving evidence. Suddenly, a sharp knock interrupted his concentration. It was Clara, holding a folded envelope with trembling hands. "This was found in Aunt Marjorie's dressing room, Lord Peter," she said. Whimsy unfolded the note carefully. The handwriting was hurried but unmistakably Aunt Marjorie's. "They know about the silver. I must act before it's too late. Trust no one. The orchard at midnight." The message was cryptic, but its urgency was undeniable. Whimsy's gaze lifted to the fading light outside. "Midnight in the orchard, Miss Marsh. It seems our missing lady planned to meet someone under cover of darkness. The question is, who and why?" Clara swallowed hard. "Do you think she was in danger?" "Danger, and perhaps deeper entanglement than we imagined. We are dealing with a network of secrecy, Miss Marsh. And that note is a key." Whimsy's mind circled the possibilities. The debts, the missing salver, the whispered bribe, the telephone call, and now this midnight rendezvous. Each piece hinted at a puzzle far more tangled than a simple disappearance. "Tonight we must be vigilant," Whimsy declared. "I shall arrange a discreet vigil near the orchard. We must catch the ghost that haunts Lavender House, or at least shed some light on its shadows." As the afternoon waned, the house settled into a strained quietude, the servants' furtive glances betraying their unease. Whimsy spent the hours before nightfall meticulously mapping out the orchard's layout, noting vantage points and potential hiding places. The ruined chapel stood as a grim sentinel at the orchard's boundary, its stones whispering of long-forgotten transgressions. When darkness finally embraced the estate, Whimsy took his post among the gnarled branches and thick hedges, his keen eyes sweeping the moonlit grounds. The silence was profound, save for the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. Minutes stretched into hours, each one weighed with expectancy. Then, just as the clock in the hall told midnight, a figure emerged from the shadows, a slender silhouette moving cautiously toward the well. Whimsy held his breath, heart steady but mind alert. The figure paused, glancing around before kneeling at the well's edge. From beneath a cloak, a glint of silver flashed, the missing salver. Unmistakably, the figure spoke in a low whisper. "You promised, Frederick. Where is the payment?" A second figure stepped forward, taller, broader, with an unmistakable air of authority. "Calm yourself, Aunt Marjery," the voice replied. "The funds will come, but you must keep silent. The family's reputation depends on it." Whimsy's pulse quickened as he recognized the second figure, Frederick Marsh himself. The orchard's midnight meeting was no accident, but a carefully arranged transaction, steeped in fear and blackmail. The missing lady was far from a passive victim. She was enmeshed in a desperate game of leverage and loyalty. Whimsy emerged silently from his concealment, clearing his throat. Quite the clandestine meeting, wouldn't you agree? Both figures startled, turning sharply toward the unexpected witness. The tension that had been palpable moments before snapped into a brittle silence. "Lord Peter Whimsy," Frederick said with forced composure, "I should have known you'd find your way here." "And I," Whimsy replied, "should have expected nothing less from Lavender House's darkest hour. Now, if you please, you both owe me explanations." The orchard, cloaked in night and secrets, waited for the truth to surface. The sudden illumination of Whimsy's presence in the moonlit orchard sent a ripple of tension through the two figures. Frederick Marsh's face, previously composed with a gentleman's practiced coolness, now betrayed a flicker of unease, while Aunt Marjery's shoulders stiffened as if bracing for some unseen blow. "Lord Peter," Frederick said, his tone measured but with a subtle edge of irritation, "your timing is, as always, impeccable, though I confess I had hoped for a less public exchange." Whimsy allowed himself a faint smile, that wry twist of the lips, which bespoke a man who savored the dramatic as much as the logical. "The public, or at least the moon and stars, are excellent witnesses, Mr. Marsh. I'm curious, however, to understand the nature of this exchange you so delicately referenced." Aunt Marjery's voice, brittle but resolute, broke the silence. "It is as you say, Lord Peter. Frederick has demanded payment, a rather substantial sum, in return for his silence. He threatens to reveal certain family indiscretions that would sully our name." "Indiscretions?" Whimsy repeated, his brows knitting ever so slightly. "Might I ask what sort of indiscretions, Aunt Marjery? One imagines they are rather more than a misplaced spoon or a forgotten debt." Marjery swallowed, her eyes flickering to her nephew. "Some years ago, before Frederick left for London, there were arrangements made, contracts signed in shadows. I was coerced into covering certain liabilities, debts incurred through unfortunate business ventures of his. If these were brought to light, the consequences for the family estate would be dire." Frederick's lips curled into a sardonic smile. "I prefer to call it a prudent business strategy, but the question remains, will the payment be forthcoming?" Whimsy stepped forward, his gaze resting on Frederick with an intensity that bespoke the silent calculation behind the suave veneer. "You speak as though you believe the family's wealth to be inexhaustible, yet the missing silver salver, the clandestine meetings, the whispered threats suggest that not all is well at Lavender House." Marjery looked away, a faint tremor in her voice. "Our finances are strained. The estate's income has diminished. But it is the family's honor that Frederick seeks to trade in, not mere coin." Whimsy folded his hands behind his back, pacing slowly. "The question is then whether these threats are the motive behind a disappearance or a more sinister scheme. Miss Marsh, you say Aunt Marjery vanished from her room between 9 and 10:30, yet here she stands, unbound and unharmed." Marjory's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I left to meet Frederick, to confront him, but I feared that things might spiral beyond control. I stayed hidden after our meeting to avoid detection. Yet you left no message for your mother. No indication of your plans, fear and shame, Lord Peter, and a hope that matters might resolve quietly." Whimsy turned sharply. "And the missing salver? Its absence suggests more than a mere trinket lost." Marjery nodded. It was the token Frederick demanded as a guarantee of payment. Symbolic, perhaps foolishly so. Wimsey paused, then asked, quietly, "And the voices Mr. Thomas overheard? Silver for silence?" Frederick's jaw tightened. An unfortunate phrase taken out of context. Indeed, but your presence here at midnight, your demands and the silent consent of the missing lady create a rather compelling narrative, do they not? Marjory's gaze fell to the ground. Yes. I am trapped between family loyalty and personal disgrace. Wimsey stepped back, considering the tableau beneath the silver moon. Miss Marsh, if I may be so bold, your silence has shielded many truths, but it has also fostered shadows where danger may lurk. Danger? Frederick scoffed. The only danger here is Lord Peter's penchant for theatrical entrances. Touché, Wimsey replied, though his eyes never left the pair. But the facts remain. The discrepancy in the timeline, the unexplained footsteps near the well, and the missing salver. There is a piece missing from this puzzle. Marjory hesitated, then whispered, "There is something else." Wimsey's interest sharpened. "Do not hesitate." "It concerns the ruined chapel," she said. "Frederick and I argued there weeks ago. He threatened to reveal a secret about the family's past, something buried in those ruins." Wimsey's mind raced. The chapel, the orchard, the silver salver, the debts, the secret meeting, they were threads in a larger tapestry, one that intertwined not just with money and blackmail, but with buried history. Secrets of the past often wield more power than those of the present, Wimsey remarked. "Tell me, what is this secret?" Marjory's voice dropped further. "It concerns the death of Frederica, Frederick's late cousin. There have always been rumors, whispered tales of foul play." Frederick's face paled slightly. Old wives' tales, nothing more. "Yet the tales persist," Wimsey said, "and with Frederica's death unresolved, these suspicions ferment. Do you believe Frederick had cause to silence her?" Marjory's breath caught. "I do not know, but Frederick's sudden departure after her death and his subsequent return with demands and threats are not coincidental." Wimsey turned to Frederick. "Would you care to explain your absence or your dealings with Frederica?" Frederick's composure cracked for the briefest of moments. "I was abroad, away from the turmoil. As for Frederica, our relations were complicated, yes, but I bear no guilt. Yet her death remains a shadow over this family," Wimsey said, "and perhaps a catalyst for current events." The orchard seemed to close in around them, the night wind whispering through the trees like a restless spirit. Wimsey's voice softened, but remained firm. "I intend to examine the chapel ruins at first light. There may be evidence overlooked, or secrets hidden in plain sight." Frederick nodded curtly. "If you must, Lord Peter, but I warn you, some stones are better left unturned." Marjory looked at Wimsey, hope mingled with fear in her eyes. "Please, find the truth before more damage is done." Wimsey nodded gravely. "Rest assured, madam, the truth will be found, though it may not be the one you wish to hear." With that, the trio parted, the night reclaiming its stillness once more. Wimsey lingered a moment longer by the well, the moonlight casting stark contrasts over the disturbed earth. The game had deepened, the stakes higher than mere inheritance or reputation. Somewhere, beneath the surface of Lavender House and its orchard, lay a secret poised to shatter the fragile calm forever. As the first faint light of dawn crept over the horizon, Wimsey felt the familiar thrill of the hunt quicken his pulse. The investigation was no longer about a simple disappearance, but about unraveling the twisted skein of family, guilt, and buried sins. The day promised revelations, but also dangers, ones he intended to meet with all the cunning and subtlety at his disposal. With the dawn's soft fingers prying open the sky, Wimsey found himself once more beneath the gnarled arches of the ruined chapel. The morning mist curled like a whisper through the broken stonework, lending the place a faintly sepulchral air. It was precisely the sort of setting where secrets preferred to linger, half hidden in shadows, half remembered by time. Whimsy's keen eyes surveyed the scene with meticulous care. Fragments of shattered stained glass lay scattered among the weeds, their once vibrant blues and reds dulled by age and neglect. The chapel bell, long silent, hung crookedly from its rusted frame, silent witness to forgotten rites and perhaps forgotten crimes. As he moved cautiously across the uneven floor, Whimsy noted impressions in the earth, faint but unmistakable. Indentations, as though something heavy had been dragged across the soil. He knelt to examine them more closely. The marks led toward the western wall, which bore the remnants of a bricked-up doorway. Curious, Whimsy murmured. A sealed passage or an attempt to conceal ingress or egress? His thoughts turned to the fate of Frederica Marsh. The rumours, vague but persistent, hinted at foul play, a death that the family preferred to consign to the past, lest it upset their delicate standing. But what could the ruined chapel conceal? Perhaps evidence long buried beneath stone and silence. As he circled the building, a sudden movement caught his attention. A figure, small and tentative, emerged from the copse of trees bordering the orchard. It was Elsie, the maid, her pale face flushed with nervous energy. "Mr. Whimsy," she whispered urgently, "I found something." Whimsy beckoned her closer, noting the bundle wrapped tightly in cloth she held. Carefully, she unfurled the package to reveal a delicate locket, tarnished but unmistakably of fine workmanship. "This was in the undergrowth near the chapel," Elsie explained, half covered by leaves. "I thought it might belong to Miss Marsh." Whimsy took the locket, weighing it in his palm. Inside, a miniature portrait, faint but still recognizable, of a young woman with eyes full of melancholy. "A keepsake," Whimsy said softly. "No, doubt Frederica's," Elsie nodded, shivering. "Do you think it means something? That someone left it here deliberately?" "Perhaps," Whimsy replied, "or perhaps it was lost in a struggle. Either way, it suggests the chapel remains entangled in the mystery at Lavender House." As the morning light strengthened, Whimsy's footsteps carried him to the bricked-up doorway. The mortar was crumbly, and with effort he prized loose a few stones, revealing a narrow passage beyond. With a small lantern retrieved from his coat pocket, Whimsy ventured inside. The air was cool, tinged with the scent of damp earth and forgotten dust. The passage opened into a small chamber where, amid scattered bones and fragments of old wood, Whimsy's eye caught a scrap of fabric, rich and dark, embroidered with a pattern resembling the Marsh family crest. His heart quickened. Here was proof that someone had sought refuge or concealment in this hidden place. But who and when? Emerging from the chapel's shadow into the brightening orchard, Whimsy's thoughts were interrupted by the approach of Clara Marsh. Her expression was grave, but also tinged with something deeper, an unspoken urgency. "Lord Peter," she said, "there's been news from the village." Whimsy's curiosity was immediate. "Do tell." "Mrs. Brenton, the village postmistress, contacted the household this morning. She claims to have received an anonymous letter warning that Miss Marjory's disappearance is connected to a long-standing feud between the Marsh family and the Cravens." Whimsy's eyebrows lifted. The Cravens. That name has surfaced before, in some of the estate's older documents. A rival family, historically embittered. "Indeed," Clara continued. "The letter speaks of a blood debt owed and a reckoning long overdue." Whimsy folded the letter carefully, noting the neat, unfamiliar handwriting. "This widens the circle considerably. The Cravens' involvement would explain much, the threats, the midnight meetings, and perhaps even the missing silver. But it also raises a more pressing question. What role does the past play in the present?" Together, Whimsy and Clara made their way to the village post office, a modest building nestled between the grocer's shop and the pub. Mrs. Brenton, a robust woman with a hawk-like gaze, greeted them with a mixture of deference and evident concern. "Mrs. Brenton," Wimsey began, "this letter, can you tell me anything of its origin?" Mrs. Brenton shook her head slowly. "No one came to the door, sir. It was slipped under the mail slot late last night. I've kept it safe, but I fear whoever sent it does not wish to be known." "Has there been unrest between the Marshes and the Cravens recently?" "Not openly, Lord Peter, but the Cravens have never forgiven the Marshes for acquiring the estate nearly a century ago. There's talk of old grievances, whispered threats in the tavern. The village divides quietly. But the resentment runs deep." Wimsey's mind connected the dots. A family feud simmering beneath a polite surface could manifest in acts both subtle and brutal. The disappearance of Marjery Marsh was no isolated incident. It was part of a tapestry woven from decades of bitterness. Leaving the post office, Wimsey pondered the next move. The letter was a warning, but from whom? A Craven sympathizer? A member of the Marsh household seeking to manipulate events? The question demanded answers. Returning to Lavender House, Wimsey found Frederick Marsh in the library, engaged in a tense conversation with the family solicitor. The two men's expressions were guarded, as if aware that the walls themselves might overhear too much. Wimsey interrupted gently but firmly. "Mr. Marsh, I understand you have knowledge of the Marsh-Craven feud." Frederick's eyes flickered. "A regrettable legacy, Lord Peter, but one best left in the past. I fail to see how it pertains to Marjory's disappearance." "Yet the anonymous letter claims otherwise. The feud is alive and the threats renewed." Frederick's jaw clenched. "Old grudges die hard, but they do not justify interference in family matters." Wimsey inclined his head. "Very well. However, given recent developments, I must advise a thorough review of all relations, current and historical. The solution lies not just in the present, but in understanding the past's shadows." That evening, Wimsey convened a discreet meeting with Clara, Frederick, and the loyal gardener Thomas. Together, they recounted events and scrutinized timelines anew. It was then that Thomas revealed a detail previously overlooked. On the night of Marjory's disappearance, a visitor had been seen approaching the estate's western boundary, the area near the ruined chapel, just before 9 o'clock. "An unfamiliar man, sir," Thomas said. "Tall, with a heavy coat and a limp." Wimsey's thoughts raced. Could this figure be connected to the Cravens? An emissary, or perhaps an avenger? He cross-referenced the timeline. The visitor's arrival before 9. Elsie's discovery of the open library window near the same hour. The whispered voices near the orchard. The midnight meeting. A pattern emerged, intricate and compelling. Wimsey proposed a plan. He would set a watch near the chapel that very night, hoping to catch the mysterious visitor or any other shadowy figure involved in the unfolding drama. As darkness descended once more upon Lavender House, the old chapel stood silent and patient, a sentinel guarding secrets long kept beneath its stones. Wimsey, cloaked against the chill, took up position in the shadows. The night stretched ahead, heavy with portent. Moments passed like eternity until at last footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoed across the stone path. A figure appeared, limping slightly, cloaked against the night. Wimsey's voice was calm, but "You have some explaining to do, sir." The figure froze, then slowly turned to reveal a weathered face marked by years of hardship and an intensity that spoke of unresolved vendettas. "So we meet at last, Lord Peter Wimsey, the man said, voice low and edged with bitterness. "You seek the truth about Lavender House. Perhaps it is time someone told it." The game had deepened once more, shadows converging at the chapel's doorstep. Wimsey's eyes gleamed. The revelation was near, but so too was danger. The man's eyes glinted under the lantern's glow, sharp and unyielding, as if he had spent a lifetime battling shadows both without and within. Whimsy took a measured step forward, the gravel crunching softly beneath his polished boots. "You're limp, sir." Hardly a casual detail. Whimsy began, his tone as courteous as ever, but edged with that unmistakable sharpness which rendered polite conversation into an interrogation. "Might I inquire if you are acquainted with the Marsh estate, or perhaps the Cravens?" A faint smile, barely concealing years of bitterness, curled the man's lips. "More than you suppose, Lord Peter. I am Harold Crane, formerly steward. To the Cravens estate, a position lost. Much like many things that once were, I come seeking restitution or at least understanding." Whimsy regarded him thoughtfully. "Then you admit to visiting Lavender House on the night Miss Marjery vanished?" Crane's eyes narrowed. "I did. And not merely to pay a social call." The detective's mind raced. A steward, dismissed or disgraced, with motive enough to disturb the quiet village air. Yet there was something more tangled here. Some grievance stretching back beyond simple personal vendettas. "Please," Whimsy said, "illuminate this path. What truth do you bear?" Crane's voice lowered, conspiratorial. "The feud between Marsh and Craven is older than either family remembers. Blood debts, betrayed trusts, and secrets buried beneath those ancient stones you so carefully examined. This morning, Marjery, poor foolish Marjery, she found herself entangled in affairs best left untouched." "Affairs of what nature?" Whimsy pressed, his fingers lightly touching the lantern's handle, ready for the unexpected. Marjery had discovered something, letters, documents from long ago, revealing the extent of the Marsh family's duplicity in acquiring their estate. The Cravens were forced out, their honor trampled. Marjery was trying to make it right, to restore justice. But the past does not yield easily, and those who guard it do so fiercely. Whimsy's thoughts turned to the bricked-up chapel doorway, the hidden chamber, the scrap of embroidered fabric. This was no mere disappearance, but a collision of histories, grievances resurfacing with deadly consequence. "Why approach me, Mr. Crane? Why not the local constabulary or the Marsh family directly?" Crane's gaze hardened. "Because I feared they would bury the truth, as always. I came in secret, hoping to find an ally in you." Whimsy studied the man carefully. The limp was genuine, the bitterness palpable, but beneath the surface, a flicker of desperation betrayed Crane's deeper conflict. "Very well," Whimsy said, "you will come with me to Lavender House. There are others who need to hear this tale." As they made their way back through the orchard, the first rays of dawn gilded the branches, lending the scene an eerie calm that belied the tension beneath. Inside the great hall, Clara and Frederick awaited anxiously. The weight of the nights. Revelations pressed heavily upon them. Crane's arrival and his confession shifted the atmosphere palpably. Old wounds reopened, alliances reconsidered. Whimsy took Crane's hand firmly. "I suggest we gather all parties in the library. It is time for truths long buried to see the light." The room was soon filled with tense faces. The Marsh family members, servants whose loyalty had been strained by suspicion, and the ever-watchful solicitor. Crane recounted his tale in measured tones, weaving together history and present threat as the narrative unfolded. It became clear that Marjery's disappearance was a desperate attempt to silence a reckoning. Yet questions remained. Who among the Marsh family stood to lose the most? Who acted to prevent the past from destroying their fragile peace? Whimsy's gaze settled on Frederick Marsh, whose discomfort grew with every passing moment. The older man's practiced calm was beginning to crack. "You seem troubled, Mr. Marsh," Whimsy observed gently. "Might I ask if you were aware of Marjery's intentions regarding the Craven documents?" Frederick's lips tightened. I was aware she had become interested, but I dismissed it as youthful folly. Yet youthful folly can stir great storms, Whimsy replied, and folly is sometimes a mask for something far darker. Have you or anyone within this house taken steps to ensure those documents remain hidden? Frederick's eyes darted towards his sister Clara, then away. No, he said finally, but I confess I feared what might happen should such secrets come to light. Fear can be a powerful motive, Whimsy noted quietly, and sometimes fear breeds action that defies logic until viewed through the lens of desperation. A silence settled. Then the sound of footsteps interrupted the moment. The door opened to admit Elsie, the maid, clutching a small, leather-bound book. I found this in Miss Marjery's room, Elsie said, handing the volume to Whimsy. It's her diary. The detective took it carefully, noting the neat, flowing script. He flicked through the pages, eyes scanning for clues. Marjory's entries revealed a growing obsession with the estate's hidden past, her attempts to decode cryptic references in family papers, and fears that someone was watching her. 1. Entry caught Whimsy's attention. They say the chapel holds the truth, but truth is a dangerous thing. If discovered, it will tear us all apart. I must be careful. The words hung heavy in the room, as if Marjory's voice whispered warnings beyond the grave. Whimsy closed the diary gently. It seems our missing lady was far closer to unraveling this mystery than any of us suspected. But her caution suggests she sensed danger nearby. Danger that may have found her, Frederick murmured. Whimsy's mind returned to the bricked-up chamber beneath. The chapel, the embroidered fabric, the hidden passage. It was clear now that Marjery had used that secret refuge, either as a sanctuary or as a hiding place during her final hours. He addressed the room with measured authority. We must revisit the chapel at once. There is more to be discovered. There I am certain. The group moved out, the sun climbing higher and casting long, sinister shadows behind them. Back in the ruined chapel, Whimsy led the search. Under his direction, the stones sealing the doorway were carefully removed, revealing the narrow, dust-choked chamber once more. This time, the light from their lanterns fell upon an array of papers, yellowed, fragile, and carefully stacked in a rusted tin box. Whimsy's fingers trembled slightly as he lifted the documents. They were letters, deeds, and legal papers, evidence of the Craven's dispossession, accusations of fraud, and pleas for justice denied. Among them was a letter addressed to Marjery, signed by a Craven ancestor, imploring her to seek the truth and restore the family's honor. The room seemed to close in with the weight of unspoken histories. Whimsy looked up, meeting the eyes of those present. This is the root of the conflict. These papers hold the power to undo the Marsh legacy. But who hid them here and why? Clara asked. Because the truth was too dangerous to confront openly, Whimsy replied, and because someone feared that discovery would bring ruin. Suddenly, a sharp noise from the chapel's entrance drew their attention. A shadow moved, quick and purposeful. Whimsy stepped forward, his voice firm. Stay where you are. From the gloom emerged a figure, a man with a pale face and eyes full of guilt. It was the estate's butler, Mr. Grayson. I had to, Grayson stammered. I couldn't let those papers see the light. They would destroy everything the Marsh family has worked for. Whimsy's gaze was steady, unflinching. And so you hid them here. But when Marjery sought the truth, what did you do? Grayson's resolve faltered. I didn't mean for her to disappear. It was an accident. She confronted me in the chapel. There was a struggle. I only wanted to frighten her. A tension broke loose in the silent chamber, charged with betrayal and regret. Whimsy turned to the assembled group. The truth is no longer hidden, thanks to Marjory's courage and the persistence of those who seek justice. but it is the reckoning that follows which will determine the fate of Lavender House. The past, long buried beneath stone and silence, had been unearthed, and the game was far from over. The weight of Mr. Grayson's confession settled upon the assembled group like a sudden chilling draught in the long-forgotten chapel. His voice, quivering yet resolute, betrayed a man at the edge of a precipice, caught between fear and the desperate need for absolution. Wimsey's gaze did not waver. "An accident, you say? Yet Miss Marjorie Marsh has not returned. Tell us, Mr. Grayson, what became of her after this struggle in the chapel?" The butler's hands clenched tightly. I panicked. She was stronger than I expected. She struck her head, fell against the altar stone. When I saw her lying there, I thought she was dead. But thought is insufficient when dealing with the disappearance of a lady of the house, Wimsey interjected dryly, the faintest hint of irony softening the severity of his words. "You had options, sir. You might have summoned aid, called for the doctor, or simply informed the family. Instead, you concealed this truth." Grayson's shoulders sagged. "I was loyal to the Marsh family in my way. I feared the ruin that the Craven documents might bring if exposed. I tried to protect the estate, and in doing so, I have wrought nothing but ruin upon us all." Wimsey nodded slowly, allowing the gravity of the admission to hang heavy in the air. "We shall see what the law and the family decide in due course. For now, the important matter is to locate Miss Marsh. Mr. Crane, can you assist us in retracing the events in the chapel?" Crane, still limping but undeterred, stepped forward. "Certainly, Lord Peter. I remember the chapel well. Miss Marsh used to confide in me when I was steward. She spoke often of the past injustices and of her secret search for the truth." Wimsey regarded the man anew. "Your knowledge may prove indispensable." Together the small group ascended from the dusty confines of the hidden chamber, their footsteps echoing softly through the chapel's vaulted arches. Outside, the morning sun had risen higher, casting shafts of golden light through the stained glass, illuminating dust motes dancing in the solemn air. Once in the great hall of Lavender House, Wimsey called for a quiet moment. The assembled family and servants gathered, each face marked with a blend of shock, fear, and curiosity. Wimsey's eyes swept the room before settling upon Frederick Marsh. "Mr. Marsh, you have long maintained that Miss Marjory's curiosity was mere youthful folly, yet the evidence now suggests a far more serious purpose. You must understand, concealment only deepens suspicion." Frederick's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "I understand, Lord Peter. Very well. We must consider the final hours before Miss Marsh's disappearance with precision. Who saw her last, and where?" Clara stepped forward, her expression resolute. "I last spoke with her in the drawing-room around 8 in the evening. She seemed troubled, but determined." "And after that?" Wimsey asked. "No one saw her until this morning when her absence was noticed." Wimsey exchanged a glance with the local constable, who nodded. "We will need to conduct a thorough search of the grounds, including the surrounding woods and any outbuildings." Just then, the butler, Grayson, interrupted quietly. "There is the old servant's cottage, at the far end of the orchard, long abandoned. I saw Miss Marsh head in that direction last night." Wimsey's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Thank you, Mr. Grayson. That will be our next destination." The party, now swelled with constables and a few volunteers, moved swiftly across the dew-damp grass toward the dilapidated cottage. Its weathered boards and sagging roof suggested neglect, yet Wimsey's intuition told him it held answers. Inside, the cottage was cold and shadowed, the air thick with the scent of mildew and forgotten years. Wimsey's eyes scanned the room, taking in the scattered debris and overturned furniture. On the floor, a faint trail of footprints led to the back door, slightly ajar. He crouched, examining the prints with his gloved fingers. "Fresh, yet incomplete," he murmured. "Someone left in haste." A rustle from the corner startled the group. From beneath a threadbare blanket emerged a figure, pale and trembling, a young woman, eyes wide with fear. "Miss Elsie?" "Whimsy," said gently. "What are you doing here?" Elsie, the maid, blinked rapidly, then whispered, I followed Miss Marjery last night. She confided in me about the documents, and I feared for her safety. When she vanished, I stayed here, hoping she would return." Whimsy nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "Your loyalty is commendable, but secrecy seldom aids the truth." He turned to the constables. "Prepare to extend the search further afield. Miss Marsh's disappearance is no accident. It is the result of deliberate concealment, and those who seek to hide her whereabouts will stop at nothing." As the search party dispersed, Whimsy lingered, piecing together the fragments of a dark puzzle. The hidden chamber, the Craven documents, the butler's confession, and now the frightened maid's presence, all pointed to a web of deception spun to protect long-buried sins. Yet one question gnawed at him. If Grayson's story was true, how had Marjery survived the struggle, and where was she now? Returning to the house, Whimsy took a moment to study the clocks that adorned the hallway. Each ticked at odds with the others, some minutes ahead, others lagging behind. An inconsistency, perhaps trivial, yet to Whimsy, time was never trivial. He mused aloud, "The clocks, the servants' habits, even the placement of furniture, all contain hidden truths." "The devil is often in the details." Clara approached hesitantly. "Lord Peter, may I ask, do you believe Marjery is still alive?" Whimsy's eyes twinkled with enigmatic amusement. "Miss Marsh is a resourceful lady, Miss Clara. I would not count her out so soon. The game is still afoot, and the shadows lengthen with each passing moment." As dusk approached, the search had yielded no sign of Marjery. Yet Whimsy felt the tide shifting, the pieces falling into place with the slow precision of a master's hand. He knew the truth lurked not only in the past, but in the present actions of those around him, and that the final revelation would come not with fanfare, but with the quiet unraveling of carefully constructed lies. For now, Lavender House held its breath, poised between revelation and ruin, while Lord Peter Whimsy prepared to draw the curtain on a mystery that had haunted the corridors far longer than anyone dared admit. The long shadows of evening stretched across the grounds of Lavender House as the search parties returned from their fruitless expeditions. Lord Peter Whimsy stood near the grand entrance, the weight of silence heavy around him. The house, a sprawling relic of faded grandeur, seemed to close in tighter with every passing hour, as though holding its breath along with its inhabitants. Clara approached quietly, her face pale but resolute. "Lord Peter, the family and servants are anxious. They want answers, and soon." Whimsy nodded thoughtfully, his eyes fixed on the fading light. "Understandable, Miss Clara. Yet haste may scatter the clues we so desperately need to gather intact. Our next step must be deliberate." He turned inward, toward the library where Marjery's diary and the recovered Craven documents lay spread upon the massive oak table. The papers whispered of deceit, stolen inheritance, and a legacy stained by greed. The revelation of these truths had already torn fissures in the family's veneer of respectability. Frederick Marsh entered the room, his expression a mixture of guilt and weariness. "Lord Peter, I have been reflecting on what Mr. Grayson admitted. If Marjery suffered a blow to the head in that chapel struggle, she could have been seriously injured, or worse." "Indeed," Whimsy replied quietly. "Which begs the question, why has no one reported a body or disturbance in the vicinity?" Frederick's gaze fell. "I have wondered the same. There are old cellars beneath the house, disused for decades. I had hoped that no one would think to search them." Whimsy's eyes sharpened. "And yet, in mysteries such as this, those forgotten places often harbor secrets." He motioned for a lantern. "Lead the way, Mr. Marsh. It seems we must delve deeper into the bowels of Lavender House." The group descended into the shadowed cellar corridors, the air growing cooler and heavier with every step. The faint scent of damp earth and forgotten time clung to the stone walls. Whimsy's hand brushed along the rough-hewn surface, feeling the centuries-old chill beneath his fingertips. A sudden glimmer caught his eye, a faint scratch on a floorboard, recently disturbed. Kneeling, he inspected it closely. "This floorboard has been pried loose not long ago." Frederick swallowed hard. "That is the old servants' wine cellar. It has not been used since before my time." Whimsy beckoned the others forward. "Let us see if it might have served as a refuge or a prison." With careful hands, they lifted the board to reveal a small hollow beneath, just large enough to conceal a person. Inside, a folded piece of fabric rested, unmistakably the same embroidery that Whimsy had earlier noted in the chapel. Marjery's handkerchief, Clara breathed, stepping forward to retrieve it with gloved fingers. Suddenly, a soft noise echoed from the darkness deeper within the cellar, a faint moan, followed by a coughing fit. Whimsy's heart quickened. Someone is here. Guided by the flickering lanterns, they moved toward the sound, finding, in a hidden alcove beyond a false wall, a figure lying on the cold stone floor, a woman, pale, weak, but unmistakably alive. Marjory Marsh's eyes fluttered open at the sight of friendly faces, her voice a whisper. "You came. I feared no one would find me." Whimsy knelt beside her, relief tempered by concern. "You have endured much, Miss Marsh. Can you tell us what happened after your confrontation with Mr. Grayson?" Marjory's gaze flickered to Frederick Marsh, then back to Whimsy. "Grayson, he meant to scare me, but the blow was accidental. I lost consciousness and woke here. Someone brought me food and water. I think it was Elsie." Elsie, standing nearby, nodded quietly, her face flushed with worry. "I couldn't leave her alone. I hid here as best I could." Whimsy's mind raced. The pieces were falling into place, but the question remained, who else was involved in this conspiracy to silence Marjory and protect the Marsh secrets? Marjory continued, her voice gaining strength. "The documents I found prove the Marshes took the estate through forged papers and threats. I wanted to expose it. But my brother, he warned me to stop." All eyes turned to Frederick, whose composure faltered. "I did warn her, not to protect myself, but to protect the family from ruin. We have all tried to keep the peace. But peace built on lies is a fragile thing," Whimsy said quietly, "and lies are no match for the truth once unearthed." He helped Marjory to her feet. "You must rest now. Tomorrow we will gather all evidence and confront the Marsh family fully." As Marjory was assisted upstairs, Whimsy lingered in the cellar, pondering the layers of loyalty, fear, and betrayal entwined with the estate's ancient stones. The hidden cellar had become a crucible where past sins and present courage met, and it was clear that the path ahead would require both strength and subtlety. Outside, the stars emerged, cold and distant, as if watching the unfolding drama with indifferent eyes. Lavender House, with its secrets bared and its players revealed, stood ready to face the reckoning that only time and justice could deliver. The drawing room of Lavender House was heavy with expectation the following afternoon. The assembled family, servants, and a handful of local dignitaries gathered beneath the high ceilings, their faces taut with a mixture of dread and curiosity. Lord Peter Whimsy stood by the hearth, his stance casual but his eyes sharp, flicking over the assembly as though each individual were a piece of a puzzle yet to be fully solved. "Before we begin," Whimsy began, voice carrying the perfect note of arch civility, "let me assure you that Miss Marjory Marsh is, as you can see, very much alive. Her recent confinement, though unpleasant, was not fatal, unlike the death of truth we often see when secrets remain buried. He paused, the faintest smile playing about his lips. Now, to untangle this most knotty affair, we must consider first the curious incident in the chapel. Mr. Grayson, your confession was most helpful, though incomplete. You struck Miss Marsh in a struggle, believing her dead. What you omitted is critical. Grayson shifted uneasily but said nothing. Wimsey's gaze then fixed on Frederick Marsh. Mr. Marsh, your warnings to your sister were more than fraternal. Concern. They concealed a greater fear. The forged documents, the Craven papers, did indeed establish your claim to Lavender House, but at a cost. Your family's legacy, if exposed, would bring disgrace and legal ruination. Frederick's eyes darkened. I only sought to protect our name. Admirable, yet misguided. And so, a plan was conceived, to silence the inconvenient seeker of truth, Wimsey said crisply. But a conspiracy of silence requires accomplices. He turned to Clara Marsh. Miss Clara, you maintained a discreet watch over your sisters. Movements no doubt wishing to shield the family from scandal. Your troubles in the drawing room were less distress and more a strategic delay. Clara's lips parted, but no words came. And Mr. Crane, Wimsey continued, your knowledge of the estate's hidden passages and timing was of particular interest. Your limp suggested an accident, but it also provided an alibi convenient. To certain times and places, Crane swallowed. I did what I must to keep the peace. Peace, yes. But at what price? Wimsey asked. He raised a hand, silencing murmurs. Miss Elsie, your loyalty and courage were admirable, hiding Miss Marjery and aiding her recovery in the cellar. Without you, the truth might still lie beneath the floorboards. Elsie bowed her head, cheeks flushed. Wimsey folded his hands. In short, the disappearance was orchestrated by those desperate to maintain a fragile status quo. The injuries inflicted were unintended but expedient. The hidden cellar served as both prison and sanctuary. He turned back to the entire room, voice low and steady. Yet it is clear now that justice, like time, cannot be indefinitely distorted. The clocks of Lavender House, misaligned and errant, are but a metaphor for this tangled affair. Each lie was a minute fast or slow, and Miss Marsh, persistent as the inevitable hour, has reset the clock. There was silence, heavy and unbroken, before Frederick Marsh finally spoke. What will happen to us now? Wimsey smiled, a touch of warmth breaking through his usual reserve. The law will take its course, tempered by circumstance and character. But more importantly, the truth has triumphed, thanks to Miss Marsh's courage and the painstaking inquiry of many. He nodded toward Marjery, who met his gaze steadily, a flicker of gratitude in her eyes. As the assembly began to disperse, the weight of Lavender House seemed lighter, the secrets no longer lurking in shadow, but brought into the cleansing light. Wimsey lingered for a moment, then turned to Clara. It is curious, is it not, how often the grandest houses conceal the smallest tragedies. Yet in all human affairs, it is the subtleties, the fleeting glances, the misplaced timepieces that betray us. He placed his hat upon his head with a small flourish. I trust Lavender House will prove a more hospitable clock in future. With that, Lord Peter Wimsey stepped into the crisp afternoon air, the faint scent of gardenia trailing behind him as he departed, leaving a house poised between its past sins and the promise of honest dawn.